Good evening. This is the JP Dinnell podcast, episode 44. I am JP Dinnell, and as always, I have Lucas with me. What's up, buddy?
What's going on, man?
How you doing, my man?
Good. I'm excited to do a duo. It's been a while since we've just done an episode that's just the two of us.
Just the two of us.
I feel like I should reach over and attempt for
Just
commitment fingers. Send in the pinky scout.
Stay over there. All right. How you feeling?
I'm feeling great.
Good.
Voice is going a little bit, but man, we got back from that youth camp. I think we talked about this a couple times before. That I preached youth camps during the summer, and so just got done with 3 out of 4 weeks. Preaching youth camps, and so between that and the sermons and stuff, I've spoken probably close to 400,000 words.
Dang.
Yeah. That's between conversations and stuff, they were okay, so your sermons, you average about between 4,000 and 6,000 just for that sermon. And then, but you're having conversations all throughout the day and constantly pretty much from 6:30 in the morning until 11 o'clock at night.
Let's go. That's awesome.
It's great, man. We had a lot of students get saved, a few students that committed their lives to ministry, a lot of rededications.
That's awesome.
Yeah, got sent a picture of some kids that got baptized right after we got back. So,
dude,
that's pretty cool, man.
That's outstanding.
It's my favorite thing I get to do all year.
Dude, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, so I'm going to read out of the book Dichotomy of Leadership, written by Jocko Fuel, Leif Babin, one of my favorite books. Extreme Ownership was an incredible book. I mean, you know my story. A lot of people, I've shared it. They know the story of how reading Extreme Ownership and trying to implement those things in my life changed my life. And then when Jocko and Leif wrote Dichotomy of Leadership, I loved it because it really helped me understand some of the things that I was struggling with and what I need to be doing better as a leader. So I'm going to dive into chapter 7, Discipline, Not Rigid. And this chapter is written by Jocko Fuel. Central Baghdad, Iraq, 2003. Why the heck are all the guys in front of that Humvee smoking? I wondered. As I glanced at the Humvee in front of me, it looked as if someone flicked a cigarette out of the vehicle, the glowing red embers creating tiny explosions against the side of the Humvee and the street around it. Then I saw another one, and another one. A few seconds later, reality hit me. Those weren't cigarette embers hitting the Humvee, they were bullets. It was the first time I had been shot at, and I didn't even know it. Our SEAL platoon was in a convoy of Humvees in central Baghdad, headed towards the notoriously violent part of town. In the early days of the Iraq War, our Humvees had no armor. The vehicles had no doors and were thin-skinned bullets, where thin-skinned bullets could pass right through the exterior. They were not meant for urban combat, making the incoming small arms fire a real threat. Unfortunately, we couldn't see where the enemy was coming from, so we did not return fire. A minute or two later, we pulled into our destination, a small outpost in north central Baghdad. Once our convoy stopped inside the compound, the radio call came out over my headset. One of my guys was hit. Over the radio, the medic asked which vehicle the wounded man was in. The call came back that the wounded man was in the vehicle 4. I got out of my vehicle, did a quick visual assessment of our current tactical situation. All vehicles were in line on the road, All vehicles were in line on the road on which we had driven into the compound. The road ran parallel to the nearby Tigris River to our right. We had driven past the main building in the outpost, protected by a row of large wire and fabric boxes filled with sand and gravel, called HESCO barriers. The wall of the HESCO barriers extended along the bank of the Tigris River opposite the main building. But as the road continued past the main building, those HESCO barriers came to an end. It didn't seem like a big concern to me, as the Tigris was fairly wide and small arms would likely not be effective from the bank of the other side. Once I felt comfortable with our situation, I walked back to Vehicle 4 to check the condition of the wounded SEAL. I had never had one of my men wounded before. I had never even been shot at before, nor had anyone else in the platoon. But I wasn't panicked. I knew my corpsman would quickly assess the wounded SEAL and begin begin treatment. I also knew the 28th Combat Supply Hospital, CSH, was less than 10 minutes away, and we could be there quickly if we needed, just as we had briefed in our contingency plan. Luckily, it was not needed. The wound was minor, miraculously, but minor. A single bullet, which must have been a ricochet with greatly reduced power, hit the SEAL in the head, penetrating the skin, but not puncturing his skull. Instead, it had traveled in an arc between his head, in between the skin and the skull. The corpsman checked the entry wound, traced the bullet, literally pushed the bullet along the track of the wound until it arrived at the entry point, and then simply squeezed the wound as the bullet popped out. No problem. Just think about that. It's just like,
dude,
cool, no problem.
That's great. A bullet just pops out of your skin like a splinter.
And and I wanted to pause and talk about that a little bit, because that is the general mindset of most of the guys in the SEAL teams.
That's insane.
Because of the dynamic, crazy training we do to prepare guys for war, to where it gets to the point where somebody does get shot. Luckily, like you said, a miracle of God,
right,
that round didn't, was a ricochet, went in at a weird angle, and was just in between the skin and the skull and the head. But still, even then, none of his guys were freaking out.
Yeah.
They're like, all right, let's see what's going on.
Let's
just
push this bullet out backwards. Let's just push
the bullet out backwards.
Weird.
Yeah. Just as we were resolving the situation and the corpsman was telling me that we should take him to CSH as a precaution, I heard a report over the radio. "We are taking fire," someone said in our platoon inter-squad radio net. I took a knee behind the Humvee, as did the rest of the guys. We listened and looked around to try and figure out exactly what was happening. I thought I heard a couple snaps of rounds, but I couldn't tell for sure. At that point, confusion set in. I saw that my guys were looking in different directions, moving from spot to spot for no reason, pointing weapons and lasers in every direction, taking cover beside all sides of the Humvees. Everyone was trying to do something, but it looked as though they weren't sure what they should be doing. This, of course, was my fault. I was a leader. I needed to give some direction, but at this point, even I was unsure what direction to give. So I resorted to a technique that I learned from one of my old platoon commanders. When in doubt, ask. There is no shame in it, especially when compared to the shame of making a bad decision because you were too egotistical to ask a question. I like that paragraph because it shows the honesty and transparency of what combat's like. Even a bunch of trained SEALs, some of them had already had a good amount of experience, obviously not a lot of combat experience, like he was saying,
Sure.
None have been shot at this point, but a good amount of experience, and they're still confused. The fog of war is a real thing. When you're being shot at night, it's a very real thing. It's not like the movies, and that's why it's comical to me at times when people are like, oh, it'd just be easy to see what's happening. Oh, I would just, if I was getting shot at, I would I would shoot back at that person as I'm finding cover. And I'm like, okay. Okay. That's just not the reality.
Yeah.
It's just, somebody could be shooting from behind cover. They could be in a building, 2 rooms deep, shooting, you know what I mean? You're not, unless you're looking in that specific area, you see the muzzle flash, it highlights that person. It's going to be really hard for you to be able to understand where you're being shot at.
Yeah. Isn't it even difficult for you to determine where you're shooting? And isn't that why they use tracer rounds, is so that you can see whether or not you're getting close to your target at certain distances and in certain environments?
Yeah, the tracer rounds help you understand as those rounds are going in the right. But the nice thing about the lasers that we have and the night vision that we have is you're going to see where you're shooting.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the night vision, or something happened in your night vision and you're shooting in
it's a super bright afternoon in Afghanistan or
something,
Iraq.
Something could be happening. There's definitely a reason for those tracer rounds, but generally you're going to know where you're shooting at.
Yeah.
You should, because you shouldn't be shooting just to shoot.
Right.
Because you're responsible for those rounds.
Yeah.
You're not just like, all right, death blossom, just shooting everywhere.
Right.
There's innocent people in cities.
Yeah.
But to your point, yes, sometimes it can be difficult to understand where your rounds are impacting.
Yeah.
And so if you're shooting in a general direction and you're like, I don't know where these rounds are impacting, that those tracer rounds could definitely help out for that.
Yeah.
Where is the contact? I shouted. Across the river, someone shouted back. That was good. I now had something to work with, but only one person sounded off when that reply came back, which was not the way SEALs operated. In the SEAL teams, when someone gives a verbal command, everyone repeats that command to ensure that everyone gets the word. But since across the river wasn't one of our standard verbal commands or in the standard format that we used to pass information, no one repeated it. This meant that not everyone knew where the contact was. As a result, there was still confusion and a lack of action with the platoon. A few SEALs had dismounted from the Humvees and taken up positions around them. Other men, including the drivers and gunners, remained inside the vehicles. I had to clear up the confusion and fast. So that's one of the things that when we're doing the field training exercises, one of the big things that we hit on is communication.
Yeah.
And you'll hear a lot of times like, hey, where are they at? And people are like, over there. And you're like, okay. I mean, you remember us talking about this with Cody. It was like, what does over there mean? Give
nothing.
Yeah. A cardinal direction. And even this, like, these guys are like across the river. Okay.
The Tigris is pretty big.
Yeah. And so from like and that's the other thing that brings up is just like how our perspectives are flawed. Mm-hmm. So from my perspective, I could say, hey, it's across the river directly, to my right or whatever. And if I'm not being very specific with identifying a building or landmarkers, your perspective of my perspective is going to be flawed.
Yep.
It's going to be way off.
Yeah.
And that's why communication has to be very simple, clear, and concise. You have to be specific with your communication. And this is just such a great example of like
100%.
Just guys trying to communicate and just not understanding the proper way to do it.
Yeah.
And Jocko recognized it. He's like, oh, I got to clean this up quick.
This is not an apples to apples comparison, but Levi is now, he's 2, right? But he's pointing out colors. Okay.
Nice.
So like he won't say what something is. He'll just say blue.
Oh yeah.
Right. And then I'm looking, I'm like, everything I'm seeing is not blue. And I'm like, okay, my kid doesn't know his colors. Like, this is stressful. And so, but he keeps saying blue, blue, blue. But it wasn't until like I got down on his level. Like I was like, you know what? He's pretty adamant that something over there is blue. Like, even though I'm not seeing it. I'm like, buddy, I don't think so. And so I got down on his level and I looked over there, like directly what he was pointing at. Yeah, there's this little toy. It's like tucked behind another thing. But until I'm looking at it exactly from his perspective, like our communication is so wrong. Like I'm telling him that he's wrong when he's absolutely 100% right.
And, that's a very valuable lesson of just to be careful when you're in a leadership position and someone's saying something, not to just be like quick to be like, nope, you're wrong.
Yep.
And you recognize it. You're like, wait, hold on. He's very adamant. Your kid's intelligent.
Yep.
And you're like, let me look at it from his perspective. And, that's what I love in the book is Jocko's like, I had to clear up the confusion and fast. It's on him.
Yeah.
It's on him, not him to yell at his guys or be like, where over there? Like, that makes no sense. You're an idiot. Like, and there are
other things we want to say.
Yeah. And I've literally seen leaders do that in stressful situations, like start yelling at their guys. And you're like, this doesn't make anything better. So, all right. We had parked beyond the wall of Hesco Barrios, and most of the Humvees and the men were exposed to the river and the incoming enemy fire. That's a bad thing. All right. I needed to get them both, the vehicles and the men, behind the Hesco barriers, and I needed to do it quickly. In my mind, for a split second, I struggled to come up with a plan to make that happen. More important, I needed a method to communicate that plan over the radio so everyone would hear it. A long explanation of what was happening would be too complicated for people to pass verbally, and I wasn't sure what to do. Then I realized that this was a scenario that we had all seen before in training. The training scenario had been while on foot patrol in a totally different capacity, but the same procedure could be utilized here. Something everyone in the SEAL teams knew. So I decided to use the same verbal commands that directed our standard operating procedures when we were on foot. Based on the Humvee's direction of travel, the contact was on our right. So I made the call. Contact right, I yelled. And because this was a standard call, everyone was used to hearing and repeating. Everyone repeated it. Now everyone knew where the threat was. Next I yelled, online, to get everyone's guns facing the threat. Once again, this was a standard call, and everyone repeated it as they executed the action of taking aim across the river. Within seconds, every SEAL was in position with weapons trained on the threat across the river. Finally, I called, "Shift right." The command to begin to move to the right, based on the direction of the contact, which would move us back behind the cover of the HESCO barriers. "Shift right," the platoon members repeated. Immediately, the vehicles and men began moving, methodically back behind the cover of the HESCO barriers. In less than a minute, everyone was behind the protection of the HESCO barriers, and the contact was over. It hadn't been much. The incoming rounds were minimal and ineffective. We took no more casualties, and none of the Humvees were hit. It was no big deal. The only reason I remember it at all is that this was my first time receiving enemy fire. But I had learned something very important: the power of disciplined standard operating procedures. I had always been told of their importance, especially by Vietnam-era SEALs. Now I had experienced it. It's pretty cool how a simple call can get people just kind of out of it. Yeah. I mean, hey, like he's saying, it wasn't that big of a deal, but you're getting shot at. One of your buddies had been wounded, shot in the head. And so we know that people in stressful situations have a hard time making calls. And at this time, there hadn't been this heavy emphasis on that type of training in the SEAL teams down to the lower ranking guys. It was usually just on the leaders. That's when Jocko took over the training that it changed all that. So these guys are stressed out. They've never been in a gunfight. It's at night. You're getting shot at. Even though you have night vision, still hard to see across the river. I mean, there's a lot of things that are against these guys. And it was just a great example of like, hey, your communication needs to be simple, clear, and concise so that you can give guys guidelines. He didn't dictate. He didn't micromanage. He just gave general direction, and the training kicked in. That's why training is so important. Like, no matter what's going on, we have to be training. But then, he goes on to say, but discipline could be taken too far. While I now fully understood why disciplined standard operating procedures were important, it hadn't yet dawned on me that they could be imposed with too much discipline, too much rigidity. As task unit commander of Bruiser, I learned that lesson. Too much discipline. I don't think a lot of people take that into consideration.
Yeah.
When people start understanding like, hey, discipline's a good thing. We need to have SOPs. We need to have these guidelines put in place. You can be too disciplined. You can be too rigid. And in the SEAL teams, guys being super rigid, that's a bad thing. Because, I mean, you've heard me say this multiple times. You want to teach your people how to think, not what to think.
Right.
And if people are super rigid, following SOPs to the letter, while that sounds like a good idea, life is dynamic. And we have to have some flexibility. All right. So in Task Unit Bruiser, Delta Platoon initially had some trouble during their IADs. Once a contact started, the simulated attack initiated. The platoon got bogged down. Calls weren't being made. They would remain in position too long, expending ammunition without advancing or retreating from the enemy. This was bad. As a general rule, it was flank or be flanked. Either you maneuvered on the enemy or the enemy would maneuver on you. Stagnation on the battlefield will get you killed. And stagnating seemed to be Delta Platoon's reaction to each simulated enemy contact. As a task unit commander, I was responsible for the platoon's performance. After noticing the issue, I made a point to observe the Delta Platoon commander, Seth Stone, during Delta's IADS runs. Seth was a relatively inexperienced officer. Like Leif, he had done a tour on a ship in the U.S. Navy surface fleet before receiving orders to Buds, eventually going through SEAL basic training program with Leif. They were both from the U.S. Naval Academy, both from Texas, both fans of Johnny Cash and Metallica, extremely hard workers, and very close friends. I was lucky to have them as my platoon commanders. That is a fact. That being said, the fact remained that they were both inexperienced. Both had graduated from Buds only 2 years prior to being assigned as platoon commanders in Task Unit Bruiser, and each had completed only one pre-deployment workup cycle and one deployment to Iraq, where they spent most of their time not in the field running combat operations, but in the tactical operations center supporting missions in the field from inside the wire. I couldn't expect them to be expert tacticians based off the previous experience. I had to teach them. I love that. Because how many times do leaders get in positions where their subordinate leaders aren't doing what they feel like they should be able to do. They're not up to speed. And what's the general reaction of most leaders? Of bad leaders. Sorry, let me rephrase that.
The general reaction of bad leaders when your subordinates are like I would say the majority that I've seen is that they yell at them to get them up into shape.
Yeah, like that's going to work. Or they yell at them, they belittle them, they get frustrated with them. So as a leader, if I'm getting frustrated with my people, does that help me actually lead them? No, it makes it worse.
Yeah.
And now there adds some friction. So if I'm visibly frustrated and or expressing my frustration verbally or just through my body language and expressions with my people, am I building a relationship with my people?
A negative one.
Well, yeah. It's not. I'm not building up the relationship.
Right.
I'm actually making a withdrawal. So, when we have relationships, we want to think of things as either I'm making a deposit or a withdrawal.
Right.
That's a withdrawal.
100%.
As a leader, I want to be making deposits. And I love how Jocko put in there. I couldn't expect them to be expert tacticians based off of their previous experience. I had to teach them. This is something I have failed a handful of times as a parent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just over the years, naturally. These are, I'm not saying I have failed at this completely, but I have failed over the years at doing this. I'm sorry, just not doing this properly. And and this, when I read Dichotomy of Leadership, this was a good reminder to me of like, I have to be patient with my kids. I have to be patient with the people that work with me and work for me and, business partners and relationships and friendships, all those things. Like we have to have patience.
Right.
And it's okay. I mean, there's going to be times that you're frustrated with other people because they're not doing what you think they should be doing or at the level that they should be at. But at the end of the day, like if they don't know what to do or how to do it, you're supposed to teach them.
Yeah.
And, I love that line. So he goes on to say, Seth required some help. So I began to shadow him closely during his IAD runs. It was easy to shadow him, easier than it should have been. Seth was following the standard operating procedures without exception of any kind.
Oh, man.
Every move he was supposed to make, he made. When it was his turn to stand and move, he stood and moved to the next designated location. When it was his turn to lie down and return fire, he got down in the prone position and returned fire. Like a robot. He was executing the SOPs to a T without any deviation or thought, and it was following him up. And it was fouling him up. As a leader, you must make it part of your job to see what is coming next, to observe, which means we actually have to detach. I mean, I love that he says that. As a leader, you must make it part of your job to see what is coming next, to observe. How often do you think people are actually putting time into their day and their schedule to think strategically? Is it enough or not enough?
Well, definitely not enough.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
To put a percentage on it would be really difficult, but it's certainly,
that's not fair. That's why I was like, all right.
But it's certainly not enough. And anytime that you sit down with somebody and you ask them like what their goals are, then they have like one or two like little goals and they know how to get to their little goals. But you're like, all right, what do you want to do in 5 years? And like, I don't know, I haven't thought about that. And I was like, so you got no strategy.
Because it takes a lot of time. It takes work. So again, he says, as a leader, you must make it part of your job. I like that. Like, hey, that's your job, a job duty, role and responsibility. That's something, to me, when I read that, that's something I should be doing every single day.
Yep.
As a leader, you must make it part of your job to see what is coming next, to observe. By observing, leaders can understand the surroundings and the terrain. They can identify enemy positions and observe the location of their own troops. Once leaders observe all this, they can then make a call. So that means that we have to me, what I'm getting from that is we have to be collecting information before we make a call.
Yeah. And essentially that's the OODA loop, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yep. So he goes on to say, as I observed Seth, it became clear that his mistakes was following the standard procedures too closely. If as a leader you move and position yourself exactly as the procedure requires, you might not end up in the best spot to actually see what is happening. You might end up in a depression or behind a shrub or a rock, which inhibits your vision, or around a corner, out of sight from the rest of your platoon. As a leader, you might end up in a spot where your gunfire is providing critical cover fire for other members of the team. So instead of leading and directing the team, you are shooting. All of these are problematic. When Seth didn't realize what Seth didn't realize was that the standard operating procedures were general guidelines, not strict rules to be followed. In Seth's mind, the procedures were rigid, and while they certainly were rigid enough to ensure safety, he didn't realize that they were also extremely flexible. So as I read that, I can definitely relate to that. I was the same way. A lot of our guys were that way, and that was because of the previous leadership. Like our previous platoon chief wasn't that good of a platoon chief. He got fired on our deployment.
Whoa.
Yeah, not good. And so when you don't have a good, strong chief, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Tony was the platoon chief in Charlie Platoon with Leif. He was a good, strong platoon chief. He was very tactically sound.
Is this
BTF Tony?
BTF Tony? Yeah.
And so, if you don't have those leaders, that's going to be a problem. And that's what created these problems. But luckily, we had Jocko, who was a good leader, and he saw that, and he's like, oh, no, these are my problems to fix. So he goes on to say, of course, some parts of the procedures were not flexible at all. For instance, individuals could not move laterally downrange of other shooters, or they would cut off the team members' field of fire, or even worse, enter their field of fire and be hit by their bullets. But when behind the line of fire, individuals had the freedom to move around quite liberally. Why am I saying that wrong?
Liberally?
Liberally. Yeah. Cool. Keep that in there. Do not edit that out.
Check.
Especially the leaders. Leaders could move left or right behind the firing line to observe the location of men and pass the word. They could push back even farther behind the firing line to look for exits. Leaders could even grab other shooters to replace themselves in the firing line, allowing the leader to get up, move around, and look for advantageous terrain features. More important, not only could a leader do these things, a leader must do them. To not move around, observe, and analyze in order to make the best decision possible was to fail as a leader and fail the team. I'm going to repeat that. More importantly, not only could a leader do these things, a leader must do them. To not move around, observe, and analyze in order to make the best decisions possible was to fail as a leader and fail the team. I mean, that's target fixation.
100%.
And that's why detachment is a superpower.
Yep.
Okay. Goes on to say, on the next IAD iteration, I told Seth I would stay by him and tell him where to move. I like this, because most people, they hear that initially and they're like, that's micromanagement. Well, guess what? When you're training somebody up as in how to do something, it's okay to micromanage.
Sometimes you got to micromanage.
Yeah, and also, Jocko had a really good relationship with us already.
Yeah.
Even though it was at the very beginning, we had a good relationship. Seth also had a very high level of respect for Jocko. So did Leif, so did all of us. So when you have a good relationship and your people respect you, and you have to start micromanaging them to teach them a skill set and or get them up to speed, it's totally acceptable.
Were Jocko
and it's actually necessary.
Were they friends at this point, like already? Because I know that like Jocko talks about Seth as like his best friend that he had in like the whole world.
He was.
Yeah. But so at this point they're not.
No, this is at the very
level
beginning.
Yet.
I don't even think Jocko had smiled at us at this point yet.
Okay, right on.
This is.
I didn't know he did that.
He does.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
It is cool. I think I have some pictures of him
Okay,
smiling.
yeah. I'd like to see that. Just him in St. Helen just smiling.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
That was a good episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways. Okay. Back to what he was saying. On the next IAD iteration, I told Seth I would stay by him and tell him where to move. We rolled out and patrol information toward the area where the targets would pop up for the platoon to engage. I stuck by Seth, walking beside him on the opposite side of his field of fire so I would not interfere with his duties. Delta Platoon patrolled down a ravine with rock and dirt embankments on both sides. It was only a training exercise, but the high-risk live fire drills in sweltering desert temperatures that induced sweat and fatigue the SEAL instructor cadre critiquing every single move, the suspense of the targets that popped up suddenly from unseen positions, and the pressure to make good calls all ensured that tensions were extremely high. Finally, the automated targets popped up ahead of us, and we heard the pop, pop, pop of simulated gunfire they made. Seth hit the ground and started engaging the targets, as did Delta Platoon's point man, JP Dinnell, just in front of Seth. JP immediately opened up with a machine gun to suppress the enemy attack. The rest of the platoon dropped into their respective fields of fire, alternating left and right throughout the whole patrol. "Contact front!" Seth shouted, alerting everyone that the enemy targets were in front of the patrol. Man by man, the rest of the platoon repeated the call, and the shouts of "Contact front!" rippled down the line of men. I watched Seth. He knew that they were in a channelized area, the ravine, and with limited firepower up front and maneuverability restricted by the walls of the ravine, he made the call. "Center peel," he yelled, and this was a right call and really the only option in the situation. The rest of the platoon anticipated the call and quickly passed the word down the line. "Center peel." With that call, Delta Platoon began the carefully coordinated drill of cover and move. As some SEALs put down heavy suppressive fire, other SEALs got up and bounded back, away from the enemy contact. Everything was going well until it was Seth's turn to move. Seth made his way down the ravine past everyone else in the platoon, finally reaching the position where, on paper, he was technically supposed to be, as dictated by the standard operating procedures. Once there, he took a knee facing the ravine wall. I watched him as he stared at the wall of rocks and dirt just feet in front of him. "How much can you see from there?" I asked. "Not much," he said, shaking his head. "How can you figure out where to lead your platoon if you can't see anything?" I asked him pointedly. Seth was quiet for a moment. "I have no idea," he admitted. "Well, then move," I told him. Now he was really confused. "Move?" Seth asked. The SOP dictated where he was supposed to take up position, and in his mind, he had followed them. In his mind, he didn't have the ability to bend the rules, but those rules had left him staring at a ravine wall, unable to see anything that was happening. If he couldn't see what was happening, he couldn't lead. So I told him to break that procedure. "Yes, move," I told him. "But what about the SOPs?" Seth asked. Seth was concerned that his movement outside the norm would disrupt the flow of maneuver. What Seth didn't understand yet was that the SOPs weren't meant to be completely unalterable, especially for the leader. So I quickly explained it to him. "As long as you keep within visual distance of the last man," I told him, "you can move around so that you can see what the heck is going on and figure out where to move next. You're a leader. You have to find an exit." So Seth, he's in a stressful situation.
100%.
We all are. I mean, training is stressful.
You're there.
Yeah.
My favorite thing about Dichotomy of Leadership is that you get mentioned in it. Because when we've talked about like our first interactions.
Yeah.
And then when they're going through Extreme Ownership and I'm listening to the audiobook of Extreme Ownership, I hear them talk about all of this stuff. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, I know JP and he says he's in there, but they never actually say his name. And then I listened to Dichotomy of Leadership, and you're mentioned a couple of times, and I was like, all right, he's legit. he's actually in here. That's the first thing when you brought up Dichotomy of Leadership. The very first thing is they use your name in Dichotomy. That's what I had before we even got to this part. That was my very first note on Dichotomy of Leadership. That's what checked the box in my brain. I was like, no, yeah this dude's for real. So
that's funny.
But yeah, it's super confusing where you're at, and especially if you're in a position where you feel like you can't change things. Yeah. And I think that there are a lot of leaders that get hamstrung by SOPs or because they don't really understand, and tell me if I'm jumping ahead here, the purpose of an SOP is to get everybody in the right place.
Yeah.
But the commander's intent of an SOP is something that's totally different.
Yeah. And, you know, also looking at it from the perspective of, okay, hey, we're in training. We know we're training for war. We know what's going on overseas. We know it's a bad situation. We're taking training very serious. The instructors putting us through that training took it very serious as well.
Yeah.
So like what he was saying earlier, like there's a lot of scrutiny from the instructors. I mean, you make one mistake, you're hearing about it.
Yeah.
Like I'm talking, you point your weapon in the wrong direction just briefly, dude, it's going to be an issue for sure. And so there's a lot of stress there. And also thinking back to what I said earlier from our first platoon, Seth was a new guy. Yes, he was a junior officer, but he's still a new guy. And so there was a little bit of that, like, hey, shut up, new guy, just do what you're told.
Yeah. How many, because you went to SQT with Seth and Leif, so like there's a lot of new guys, it sounds like, in this group.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the natural thing in a platoon. You always have a large group of new guys because you're rotating through new guys that are coming into the platoon as you rotate through. And so there's also the aspect that Jocko understood because Jocko is a good leader. Like, I mean, what he said earlier, I couldn't expect these guys to be tactical experts. And so that's why instead of him adding a bunch of extra stress, he didn't need to. He's like, dude, obviously these guys are stressed out enough. It's hard training. It's hot. They're exhausted. And now Jocko's down there walking with you, observing, like the stress of that alone. Yeah. You're going to do some stupid stuff. But I love how Jocko shares this example. And I'm glad that he did because it's just it's such a great demonstration of what we should be doing as leaders is guiding people
100%,
you know, and teaching them, coaching them, mentoring them. And then, you know, again, teaching them how to think. So going back to what he was saying, as a platoon commander, one of Seth's job was to find an exit, a terrain feature that would allow the SEAL platoon to escape from enemy fire and mask its movement. Roger, Seth replied, and then he moved another 10 yards down the ravine. And as he did, another SEAL came back and filled in the gap, as he's supposed to. This was the inherent part of SEAL maneuvers that allowed the leader to move around to look and see and analyze the terrain. If the leader moved from the standard position, someone else would fill his spot. But Seth couldn't find an exit, and he was almost out of visual range of the last SEAL who had taken his previous position. I don't see anything yet, but I'm getting too far away, he observed. No problem, I countered. Wait for the next guy to come back and tell him to fill the space, and then you can go farther. Seth nodded and cracked a smile at me. He was starting to understand. Leading wasn't about him following the exact procedure. It required him to think and do what made the most sense so that he could best support and lead his team. Get down there, Seth barked and pointed to a position to the next SEAL, moving down the ravine in his direction. I'm finding an exit. The SEAL took a knee. Seth bumped a little farther back, scanning for an exit. Still, he saw nothing. Fill it in there, he shouted to the next man, coming his way in the ravine, pointing to a general location where the SEAL should take position. I like how he says that, to the general direction. General location. He's not saying, hey, go take a knee right by there. Point your guns that way.
That's too much communication.
Yep. And that's legit micromanagement that doesn't need to happen.
Yeah.
However, unless that's a new guy who maybe is super stressed out, doesn't know where to go. He's like, where do you want me to go? He goes, okay, hey, take a knee next to that bush. Point your weapon towards the western ridgeline. Yeah. You might need to do that once in a while, but he doesn't need to. Based off of that guy's knowledge, experience, capabilities, and
relationship.
Yeah, and Seth is also observing, they know what to do. So he just gives them broad directions.
Jocko kind of uses when he's talking about the silent leader, used that as an example at Muster 017 with you. Yep. That like, he could, if y'all were clearing out that room, that he could just give you a look and you would know exactly what to do. Yeah. But with the rest of us, he would have to give us all of those like very, like, specific instructions.
Yeah, depending on that person, like the other people's like capabilities.
Might be a head nod.
Yeah.
Or
head nod, or
point and a head nod.
Yeah.
But for a lot of us,
door.
Because we wouldn't, right?
Hold that door.
Yep.
So a little escalation there, or goal as a leader, de-escalation of how much you have to actually communicate. Seth then, okay, so he goes back to say, Seth then turned again and moved ahead and looked for an exit to get out of the ravine. Finally, he found an exit. Another ravine broke off to the right and clearly led away from the platoon's current path of travel. It would make a good route to put distance between them and the enemy contact, while protecting them from incoming fire. He took up a position at the corner of the exit. As the next man came down the ravine, Seth shouted, "Exit here! Exit here!" as he pointed down the ravine off to the right. The SEAL followed Seth's directions, and the rest of the platoon filed down by the new ravine and away from the enemy contact. They continued moving in the new direction for about 100 meters. Seth looked at me. He didn't say anything, but his face was speaking loud and clear. He didn't know what to do next. "Do you think you broke contact?" I asked him, meaning, did he think the enemy was still a threat? The guys were now moving without shooting, indicated that they could no longer see the enemy, and therefore the enemy was no longer a threat. And that's a real thing to also be doing, because if you just keep shooting to shoot, guess what? They're going to follow that sound and or know where you're at. Like, the goal also when you're breaking contact is to go silent and to be able to get away. So that way you can now flank them or just get out of there without them understanding exactly where you're going.
I don't think that's something that the NCC Mafia considers when we're doing cover and move.
I'm sure you guys don't. For sure he answered. All right, he goes back to say, for sure he answered. Okay, I said. So now what do you need? Seth knew exactly what I meant by that. Head count, he said. Yep, and then, I asked. Put some more distance between us and the enemy, he replied confidently. Okay then, I told him. Get it done. Roger, he replied, beginning to grasp his place as a leader with greater confidence. Seth moved up a little farther on the patrol, now no longer bound by the standard operating procedures. He quickly found a little depression big enough to accommodate his entire platoon. He set up in the middle of it and gave the hand signal for perimeter. And his men, as his men started to roll in, they saw him and immediately went into their standard assigned positions. Within a minute, all of the Delta Platoon was in position, guns covering every direction. Seth received a thumbs up signal from both squad leaders, indicating that they each had a full head count. All SEALs were present, and they were ready to move. Seth got up, moved to JP, gave him the signal to patrol out and away from the enemy contact. In the course of a single IAD run, Seth's ability to lead had increased exponentially, and Delta Platoon's excellent performance reflected those results. Seth now understood that standard operating procedures were not fixed, inflexible laws with no room for variation. They were guidelines that needed to be balanced with the adaptability and common sense. Balancing that dichotomy was required for everyone, especially leaders. When he saw Seth's signal, J.P. Dinnell got up from his position in the perimeter and moved out on patrol, scanning for threats. Seth followed in just behind him, taking his position as the patrol leader. The rest of Delta Platoon got up and followed Seth, just as they would over and over again in the streets of Ramadi. I like how quickly that one run changed the way Seth was thinking.
Yeah.
And when we look at it from what we should be doing as humans and as leaders, it's a coaching opportunity. It's being hands-on with your people when they need you to be, being hands-off with your people when they don't need you to be hands-on, asking earnest questions. I mean, think about that. What did he do? He goes, all right, so what do you need now? He could have said, all right, hey, you now need to get a head count. But instead, he asked him a simple question. He said, what do you need? Seth said, head count. And then put some more distance between us and the enemy. He knew Seth knew how to do most of these things. He just needed the promptings to make it part of his SOP as a leader, but then also to reiterate the training and instill that confidence in him.
Yeah.
That's why I love this book, Dichotomy of Leadership.
Do you
there
like
are
it better?
so many takeaways. Yes.
You do?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's so many. I mean, I just shared a story, and how many takeaways did we have from that? I mean,
I've got 7 questions over here that I have based off of those.
So that's just one simple story.
Right.
You have 7 questions that we could talk for a long time about. We haven't even gotten into the principle aspect of the book.
Yeah, not even close yet.
Before we do that,
right?
Let's
do
the questions.
So let's fire off some of these. We've talked a little bit on one of the Q&As about having too much discipline and what too much rigidity looks like, and then what the opposite of that is, and then kind of striking that balance. So from this particular instance, right? What do you think the main thing Jocko did was that snapped Seth out of it? Was it the asking of the earnest questions? Was it the pressure that he put on him by following him around? Was it a combination of those things?
So the pressure added to the stress that he was already experiencing.
Sure.
And so I think Jocko, the byproduct of that was adding a little stress so Jocko could see how he handled the stress.
Okay.
Because Jocko, as our task unit commander, if Seth couldn't handle the stress of Jocko just observing him, he had a lot more problems than he expected.
For sure.
So I think that's like a little byproduct of it.
Okay.
But I think based off of what I've experienced, working for Jocko, working for Leif, working for Seth, and also, working with Dave and Jamie at Echelon Front on the executive leadership team, and then also my team that, I work with by doing this with them, it's the earnest questions.
Yeah.
Those earnest questions help guide you, and instead of being like, hey, go get a head count. It's like, hey, Lucas, what do you think we should do next? And you're like, we should grab a drink of water. I'm like, all right, well, yeah, we should probably grab water soon. But next, what do you think the most important thing is? We've just been in a gunfight. There's been times where you haven't been able to see the whole platoon. We need to move contact. But before we move and create distance, what's something that you as a leader want to, what's something you really want to make sure you know that you have all of? And you're like, my people? Yeah. So what do we need to do to make sure you have all of your people, Lucas? And you're like, get a head count. Yep, I like that, man. Hey, let me know when you're up. And now I'm just, boom. And now you know what to do. Because at this point, you're also not a brand. I mean, we learn how to get head counts in buds.
Yeah.
We do a lot of stress-induced training in buds just for getting head counts.
Really?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, head counts are ingrained into our DNA. One, never leave your swim buddy, always have a good head count.
Yeah.
Never leave your swim buddy, always have a good head count. Never leave your swim buddy, always have a good head count. Like, that is imperative, is to know that you always have your people, because our guys knew on the battlefield, it's easy for separation to creep in. I mean, I share this with you. I got left behind in Ar Ramadi. And so, yeah.
Wow.
And so that's a bad situation. Head count was messed up. Obviously not intentional. Fog of war. It's a real thing. All these things were going on. So we talk about that in training all the time. Like, hey, you have to be able to get a head count. So when it came time when Jocko asked him that very simple question, Seth knew the answer. The answer was get a head count. So from that point on, after every major IAD or anytime they were moving out, do you think Jocko had to ask him, hey, what do we need to do next?
No.
Yeah, I mean, and if he did, it might have been a few more times just as a, hey, Seth, take a breather. What do you need to do next? All right, hey, I need to get a head count.
Yeah.
And the other aspect to that is when you have good leaders on your team, they now also know that that's part of it. Like our LPO, he knew head count, and that's also the LPO's responsibility, is to help get those head counts for the leadership. And the squad leaders know, hey, I need to make sure both of my fire teams are up. The fire team leader knows, hey, I need to make sure I have all my people. So it ultimately gets to the point where you get through this. And again, this was at the very beginning of our workup, all right? So these are why these things are being reiterated. We have new guys. But if I'm a fire team leader, we get done with the big gunfight, I'm looking around to make sure I have all my people. I'm not moving without my people. And so that way, if we get around corner, we break contact, I have all my people. I'm looking to you as my squad leader. I'm like, hey, one's up. We're good. Meaning fire team 1, we're good.
Yeah.
And then as squad leader, now all you have to do, hey, fire team 2, let me know when you're up. And they're like, hey, hold on, we're missing some. Oh, no, he's over there. Hey, fire team 2's up. And you're like, cool. So then you as a squad leader can go to Seth and be like, hey, squad 1's up. So now all Seth has to do is like, hey, squad 2, are you up? And then if we're not, then we can be working on that. But it's the proactivity of your fire team leaders leading up the chain of command, the squad leaders leading up the chain of command. So when you have good leaders that are empowered to lead up the chain of command, what are they doing? They're taking stuff off the boss's plate. So now if I have my guys doing the head counts, I have my guys setting the perimeters, my guys are doing all the things, what is Seth able to think about?
Anything he wants to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All the big picture stuff.
Right.
Getting alignment with his boss, task unit commander, getting on the radio, listening. And so it's a really cool story that shows us. So, I mean, we can go down so many rabbit holes.
Yeah, for
in
sure.
this one little section. Sorry. So what's your next question?
Do you remember this? Do you remember this training exercise?
As I'm reading it, I'm there.
Really?
Yep. I could smell the desert.
Really?
Yep. Yeah.
So did you realize in the position that you were in what was happening with Seth, or were you just focused on like the drill itself?
Yeah, I kind of was starting to see those things because I was close. Like Seth and I were moving in the same directions.
Right.
You knew Jocko was watching. You can hear him saying things. And then I want to believe it was like the next run that Jocko was like, hey, man, if you see an out, I need you to be looking for those outs. Like, I got an out. And he was like empowering me to take that off of Seth's plate.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was rad. Like I remember that night like it was just a few hours ago.
So when you're in that position, right, did that encourage you to see that? Or was that something that like you were like, oh, what is this guy doing?
I thought it was awesome.
Okay.
He was teaching us. And again, he had a good reputation.
Mm-hmm.
We were starting to have a really good relationship with him. And ultimately, we had a lot of respect for him.
Right. Well, the reason I ask that is because I think that there is this hesitancy with some leaders to work with, like if you're a high level, a higher level leader, and you're working with somebody in middle management, there's this hesitancy to train them in front of the subordinates because it feels like, oh, well, I'm like correcting them in front of them or whatever. But if you do it the right way,
yes,
it's actually really encouraging for the people underneath it to see that, and that can trickle down.
100%. That was exactly what I was going to say in regards to it's how you train. And so Jocko, he wasn't belittling Seth. He wasn't yelling at us. He would come up and ask questions. Like I think like one of the first, it was within the first 5 of Jocko's podcast episodes. He talks about us out in the middle of the desert and we're setting a perimeter and we're in like this perfect little circle. And I'm kind of exposed. And he goes, hey, where would I can't remember the age. He said, like, where would the young JP be right now? Like, where would you be high? If you were out here setting a perimeter, like, as a kid, where would you be? I was like, right in the shadow of those bushes. And he goes, go over there.
Yeah.
And so he would do stuff like that. He wasn't like, hey, idiot, you're sitting out here, you're exposed. Yes, it's at night, but there's enough ambient light where you're silhouetted. Hey, why don't you go blend in with that bush, dummy? And he could have said that, and I would have been like, yeah, roger that, sir. Right. Because he was correct. However, Jocko was being a good leader. He was having patience. He was having empathy. He was having a little bit of grace and understanding that newer, younger guys are going to make mistakes. And that's okay. That's why we do it in training. That's why we train. That's why training is absolutely critical so that we can grow and move. And life gives us the opportunity to train all the time.
Yeah. You mentioned in there that there was, as you're reading, as you're reading, Jocko changes his vernacular, right? How much does the jargon that's used in an environment, right? The vernacular that's specific to a group of people or the culture within an organization, how much does that really affect the efficiency of a group? Like, for instance, like when you work construction, right?
Yeah.
If somebody says, go get that jackhammer, right? Which jackhammer are they talking about?
Exactly.
Right? But they also, like if somebody goes, what is it, like a 60 and a 90 or what the two normals are, right? If somebody says, hey, go grab the 90 pound, that doesn't mean anything to me, but it does to everybody else who's, on the thing. Yeah. And so that change that he was talking about and changing to a formula that you've used in order to try to adapt it to a new situation.
Yeah. It's very important. I think about like when I would work construction with my dad. I remember the very first time we had jackhammers on a job site, and he told me, he goes, "Hey, there are 2 jackhammers, this weight and this weight." And he explained it to me, and then that way when he's like, "Hey, go grab the 90-pound jackhammer," I knew to grab the bigger 90-pound jackhammer.
Right.
And, it was just a good example of you got to set your people up for success. You have to teach them how to think, and you also can't expect them to know everything. I had never run a big jackhammer before, and my dad knew that. So how would I know the difference or whatever? Now, I will say, my dad did play a lot of jokes on guys that worked for us, and he wouldn't tell them that there was a difference, and he'd give my buddies the 90-pound jackhammer, and he'd have the little 45-pound or the 60-pounder, and just be like, just like running
That's
circles
awesome.
around those guys, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, like I can't keep up with them." Like, it was because they were running
awesome.
a 90-pound jackhammer,
Yep.
and he had the smaller one just to kind of have some fun, but he would do that as, that was a calculated, I'm going to have fun with this. It wasn't a big deal. But I do remember the first time using jackhammers, my dad told me the difference. Yeah. And I also remember the first time that I showed up to work super hungover, and he knew that I'd been out drinking all night with my friends and was hungover. The only option for me that day was the 90-pound jackhammer.
Yeah, what a guy.
And I was just like breaking up concrete, just hating life. But hey, what was he doing? He was teaching me a lesson. Like, hey, your priorities are to work. And also at that time, I had made a commitment that I was leaving for the military, and it was like, hey, I need to be focused on training and being in shape, and not going out and drinking all night with my buddies. Hey, there's a balance there. Go out and have fun, hang out with your friends. But I was exceeding that balance. There was no, I was not adhering to the proper dichotomy.
Yeah, right.
And my dad knew that, and it was a very great indirect way to get me not to be like, and then the next night when I'm out with my buddies, and it's like, "Hey guys, been good. I'm gonna call it a night," and I didn't do that all the time, but I definitely thought about that 90-pound jackhammer and the hard work. The hard day of work for working for Pat Dinnell was in the back of your mind when you're like, "I'm maybe not going to burn it down all night long."
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the idea that you're translating the environment into something that you know how to talk about. Yeah. Right? And I think we naturally do that with kids. Right? Like when you're parenting, you learn how to do that. Yeah. I think it's something that you learn how to do when you're learning to evangelize, right? To put the gospel in a context that people around you understand.
I like that,
And I don't think that it's a skill that we really work on developing in the workplace.
Yeah.
Because we want everybody to adapt the acronyms. We want them to use this. We want everybody to do their SWOT analysis or whatever. And we're not helping to translate our organizational structure, our culture into real world conversations or vice versa, so that we can bridge the gap between us and the new people, or that we can bridge the gap in communication in a new environment or a new challenge.
So last night I was attempting to fly home from Chicago after my event.
Oh yeah.
And
being on the airlines right now is a challenge.
It's been crazy, bro.
Dude, it's
that
nuts.
flight was delayed over 3 hours. We boarded the plane. They closed the doors. And then we found out we had to get off, and then they canceled it.
Oh my gosh. And all of this because of one line of code.
Yeah.
One line of code.
Yeah. Well, this was actually different.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's still a lot of issues that they're stemming from.
Yep.
But this was also like an error in the system. Because everything had been delayed so much, a lot of people were starting to get rebooked on different flights.
Yep.
But then when they were able to board the flight, everyone had like double bookings and the system was overwhelmed. And in order for them, they had to manually go through all of them, which they weren't going to be able to do in time, and the crew timed out.
No.
Yeah. So by the time we got off the plane, I got some options rebooked, found a hotel, got an Uber, got to there, and then had to be back. I got about 45 minutes of sleep last night. Between just once you get there and then
Is it
not
better just to
sleeping.
sleep at the airport at that point?
I probably should have,
Yeah.
but
I've done it a couple of times.
I mean, okay, so here's my deal. I was laying in bed for a couple hours.
Oh, yeah.
It's just my actual sleep. By the time I fell asleep, and then I kept waking up thinking,
Oh, crap, I'm going to miss it.
Yep. Yeah. So my actual sleep, my watch was like, my Garmin watch was not happy with me this morning. But I think it was worth it because then I was able to shower. I was able to lay down in bed and just, it was good.
Kind of get your head wrapped around what just happened.
Yeah. And, but I was talking to this gentleman and, we're just asking like, hey, what do you do? What do you do? Blah, blah, blah. And he asked me what I did. And he was like, okay, so do you when I was like, I work for a leadership consulting company. I'm our chief training officer. And I was explaining Echelon Front. He immediately went into like all the things you're saying. He's like, so like this, like, he was like all these acronyms, all these things. Because that's what people like to bring in leadership consulting companies. And I just smiled and I said, we don't teach any of that. And he's like confused. And he looked at me. He's like, what do you teach? And I simply said, we teach people how to build relationships, communicate, detach from their emotions, empower their people, and why it's important to take ownership. And he's like, just was blown away.
Yep.
And he asked me, he's like, so how large of a company can you work with? I'm like, we've worked with every different type of company, like every different type. We've done one event with a company that they're small. And then I was like, we have other companies that we've been working with for years.
Yeah.
And just growing and expanding. And he starts asking like more like earnest questions. And, well, what about like, okay, at what level of the organization would you come in and work with us? I'm like, well, it just depends on what you're wanting. I was like, what we do is we'll do like a pre-event call or two to really understand like your culture, do an evaluation of what you guys have going on, and we customize our training to best suit you and what you guys need. So if it's us coming in and working with the C-suite level first to make sure that they understand these principles, that they can communicate it, that they speak it, and more importantly, that they're implementing these principles,
right.
And then we can bring it to the rest of the organization. We can do that. If you want us to do something with the whole organization to just kickstart off everybody to where it's like, hey, everyone's on the same page. We all know what's going on. This is what we're trying to obtain. And then we have focused training with different levels, whether it's the top down or the bottom up or the middle, and then kind of going up and down. I mean, this guy was stoked. It was really cool because obviously it's completely different. And he was the communication part is what he really loved. He's like, okay, so the communication thing, we talked last night for a while we were waiting, and then when we got on the plane, we ended up sitting next to each other. So it was really cool, just to be able to like reiterate like what we're also just talking about in this chapter.
Yeah.
As I'm talking to this gentleman last night, who their organization has almost 7,000 people.
Good grief.
Yeah, so this guy was brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant guy, and in a really cool industry, and it was just being able to completely simplify what we do. And then as we're reading this chapter right now, and the question that you asked is what I was literally telling this guy who 100%. Runs a
very successful business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the billion.
Yeah.
Because he told me, he's like, we're doing about this many billions a year. I was like, oh, that's awesome. And like what they're doing. But this guy just was so nice.
Yeah.
And the questions he asked, I loved. Like, I just loved the questions because he was so intrigued about how our main focus is building relationships, communicating, driving ownership, detachment, all the things I said. It was a really good conversation.
Yeah, because I mean, so much is about like, all right, take your individual leadership style assessment, and then we're gonna find out what leadership style you have, and then we're gonna look at that based off of your personality test, and then we're gonna do your strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then we're gonna compile all of those things together, and then we're gonna do this. Instead, you guys are like, nope, this is what works.
Yeah,
take care of people. Take responsibility for your own stuff. Be simple about it. Yeah. And then, do these 4 things.
Yeah.
Cool.
It works.
Yeah, man.
What other questions you have?
From that section, though, the last one that I've got, so you do remember it, which I love. You're seeing it from a different aspect. The fact that you found this encouraging. now you're at the FTX.
Yeah.
You are in Jocko's shoes, sort of, right, in the FTX. How often do you see this exact same thing happen at an FTX?
Every single time.
Like every run or just like every FTX?
Yes. Both.
Okay, yeah.
Because it's human nature to not do these things initially. The tendencies and behaviors that most humans have don't follow the laws of combat and the mindsets of victory that we teach.
That makes sense.
We have to create habits to make those behaviors and tendencies align with the laws of combat and the mindsets for victory. That's what we need to create. And what's really, really, really cool is when I sit back is I get to watch Cody do this with people now. It's not me doing it. It's actually Cody for the most part. Very rarely now, if I'm at a FTX where Cody and I are both there, it's very rare that I'm doing this. Yeah. Cody's actually in this position now, going up to OICs and saying, hey, what should you be doing right now? Hey, where do you think you should be right now? Where are all your people? Asking questions to get people to think. And they're like, I don't know. And he goes, okay, well, let's think through it. And I remember standing next to Cody and him just going, all right, well, let's think through it. And so they started like in the middle of the field, like asking questions. And the guy was like, I think we need to get a head count and fall back to base. And Cody's like, I like your idea. Execute.
That's awesome,
it's just so cool seeing that. All right, I'm going to jump into the principle real quick.
Yeah.
I know you have some more questions,
but
I want to just,
that's a good place.
I just want to read
jump off
through the principle.
Yeah.
And then it'll open up more questions and then close it out because I know we're almost out of our time.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
Okay, so principle from, again, this is Dichotomy of Leadership, Chapter 7, Discipline, Not Rigid. Principle. While discipline equals freedom is a powerful tool for both personal and team development, excess discipline can stifle free thinking in team leaders and team members. Disciplined standard operating procedures, repeatable processes, and consistent methodologies are helpful in any organization. The more disciplined a team exercises, the more freedom that team will have to maneuver by implementing small adjustments to existing plans. When facing a mission or a task, instead of having to craft a plan from scratch, the team can follow standard operating procedures for the bulk of the plan. As SEALs, we had SOPs for about everything we did. The way we lined up and loaded our vehicles and foot patrol formations, the methodologies we used to clear buildings, the way we handled prisoners and dealt with wounded SEALs, the list goes on and on. But those SOPs didn't constrain us on the battlefield. On the contrary, they gave us freedom. The disciplined SOPs were a line to deviate from, and we had the freedom to act quickly based off those procedures. But there must be a balance. In some organizations, both in the military and the civilian sector, there are leaders who put too many standard operating procedures in place. They create such strict processes that they actually inhibit their subordinate leaders' willingness and ability to think. I've been definitely guilty of this in the past.
Yeah?
And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to it. And it wasn't because I didn't trust them or had ill intent. It was because I just really like being hands-on and doing the work with my people. And that's a bad thing. This may adversely impact the team's performance and become a deterrent to the mission, preventing effective leadership at every level of the organization. Discipline procedures must be balanced with the ability to apply common sense to an issue, with the power to break with SOPs when necessary, with the freedom to think about alternative solutions, apply new ideas, and make adjustments to processes based on the reality of what is actually happening. If discipline is too strict, team members cannot make adjustments. They cannot adapt and cannot use their most precious asset, their brains, to quickly develop customized solutions to unique problems for which the standard solutions might not work. I like how he says, if discipline is too strict, team members cannot make adjustments, cannot adapt, and cannot use their most precious asset, their brains. You know, I say that often is you want to teach people how to think, not what to think. And if you're being too strict, you're actually taking away their ability to think. You're hindering their thought process, which hinders their growth. All right, goes on to say, and when taken to an extreme, too much discipline, too many processes and too many standard procedures completely inhibits and stifles the initiative of subordinates. Instead of stepping up and making necessary changes, leaders confined to the strict procedures will simply follow the procedures even when those procedures are obviously leading to failure. So as a leader, it is critical to balance a strict discipline of standard operating procedures with the freedom to adapt, adjust, and maneuver to do what is best to support the overarching commander's intent and achieve victory. For leaders, in combat, business, and life, be disciplined, but not rigid. What you got?
Do you think my brain is an asset? That's my first question. This is brains are the brains of our subordinates are assets. We're not letting people use those assets. That's one of the biggest things. And so I wanted to hop back, and you said you had a story about making it difficult for your subordinate leaders.
Yeah, so it wasn't because of what prompted that statement was them not stepping up and leading and doing what they're supposed to.
Right.
And that comes to just me being too hands-on, and not because I put too many SOPs in place, but that statement of too many SOPs doing that to people prompted the thought of, oh, these are one of my things that I have to be working on, and just mindful.
Are you a takeover guy? Like
No.
when you're trying to train somebody, or when somebody comes to you with a problem, do you kind of just take over and try to solve it?
Just being the easy button, you mean? Yeah.
I catch myself doing that all the time. Hey, I can't figure this out. We'll be doing something.
Just
and
do
then
this? Yeah.
Yeah. The next thing I know, I'm in front of the computer, and the person who's
Doing
going
it.
to solve the problem is like rolled behind me, and I'm on my knees in front of their computer with the mouse and everything. I'm
Yeah.
like, what the heck am I doing? They've got to figure this out.
Yeah. And yeah, so I have that bad habit, or it's definitely gotten much better. And the reason why wasn't because I don't trust my guys. It's because I just like doing work. And I've had to create habits to reprogram the way I think about, okay, hey, the work I'm doing just needs to be different. And Leif's done a great job, and Dave Burke's really good at giving me guidance on this. He'd be like,
Yeah.
so out of all the things you decided what you should and shouldn't be doing, this is what you chose to do, JP? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, all right, talk me through it. And I'll work through it. And there's been a few times he's like, okay, that makes sense. There's other few times, like, as he's asking more questions, I'm like, oh, I definitely should not have been doing this. And I'm like, okay, yep, I get it. And
Thanks,
he's like,
good deal, Dave.
Yeah, he's like, nah, dude. He's like, just be mindful of this.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, roger that.
Right.
And again, good leadership. He's not being like, hey, you're an idiot. Stop doing that. It's like, hey, just let's think about this. And I'm like, okay, so I've really thought about it, and you're right.
That's a good thing to have in a working environment, is like people that are encouraging in that way.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've really got to watch in that type of correction is my sarcasm, because the sarcasm can be like, there's the dichotomy of it, right? Like, it can be an encouraging thing that, like, oh, you know what, the boss is kind of being sarcastic with me and all that. And so, like, that means that we're on a joking, like, we're on a friendly level, like, things are good. But that sarcasm can also be taken really quickly as, like, demeaning and hurtful and all that. And they're like, nope, he hates my guts. But what does that go back to? Relationship. 100% on all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I like the idea that the SOP is aligned to deviate from.
Yes.
I think that's a brilliant thing. So when you're coaching that in, like, the executive coaching that you do, I want to approach this from two different angles. Okay. One, from the person who's creating the SOPs. When you go to them and you say, hey, listen, you need to create SOPs for this, and this. And understand, I want you to create the SOPs as a line to deviate from. How do you explain that to somebody that you're coaching through creating SOPs?
Well, you've got to give them some guidelines of like what a good SOP looks like. And so, like, you can't, I mean, I guess so. Like, if you're just starting a business and you have no guidelines, you could disseminate roles and responsibilities and say, hey, for marketing, I need you to create these SOPs. For sales and acquisitions, I'm going to create these SOPs. And hey, for, whatever other department, right? You have in your company, and you need to create those SOPs, and they're like, okay, what are SOPs? You're like, well, it's a line that we can deviate, meaning like, hey, this is how we want to do things. So on marketing in regards to social media posts, like an SOP for marketing would be, hey, we make 3 social media posts every single day. One of them is between these hours. Another one looks like this, like whatever makes sense for us to be able to grow our brand.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, okay, cool. Like, okay, that kind of makes sense to me, and that's okay. We're literally creating something that we don't have guidelines for.
Right.
And so it's like, I don't know, like, let's see what makes sense. You're smart.
Yeah.
And also as a leader, me understanding like, hey, this is another thing that we get into in the FTX is like we'll get on to people and be like, hey, how many of you guys have ever actually done a capture kill messenger before? Besides our veterans, and even like the veterans, we've had veterans go, I never did that. You know, like we very rarely will get somebody. And so I'll be like, all right, except for him, how many of you guys have ever done a capture kill mission? And everyone's like, none of us. I'm like, cool. So Lucas, you as an OIC who's never done a capture kill mission, instead of you just asking your squad leaders, hey, what do you think we should do? You decided you should dictate the plan because based off of what experience? And they're like, oh.
Yeah.
Because they think because they now have that title that they should be making the calls.
Right.
And rather, the best thing you do, drive that ownership down. So for SOPs, I'm going to drive the ownership down. Like, hey, what do you think makes sense? And if I have to give them guidelines, that's fine if I know that. If not, then it's like, hey, here's what SOPs are. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's something I'm going to do. And then, hey, let's talk about it. And just understand, like, we don't know what's going to be what's good and what's going to be bad. And that's why we test them out. And that's why also sometimes you have to understand some SOPs are written in blood.
Yeah.
Meaning we don't do things because somebody got killed doing that. Right. Or we do things to prevent somebody from getting killed.
Right.
So it's just understanding like based off experience and education and asking people questions and doing your research. I mean, Dylan's podcast was such a great example of that.
Man, yeah.
He was talking about, he's like, I didn't have any business experience, so I started just Googling stuff.
Yep.
And I had a task of things that I needed to do every day, and he just refined those things. It's never going to be black and white. Right. It's not going to be perfect. It's just, hey, and that's why he says it's a line you can deviate from.
Yeah. What do you do with leaders that are too attached to the SOPs? That are looking at the SOPs and they're like, no, this is what has to happen. This is how we have everything designed. Our leadership is deviating from it. They're not doing what we told them to do. That's what the problem is. That's the problem I need to fix.
Right. So I think I heard that wrong.
So yeah. So the leader, your coach, you're an executive coach.
Okay.
Right. You're coaching this leader, and the leader's issue is his people aren't rigid enough.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And but you look at it and you're like, you see that what they're doing is actually really good.
Yeah, so I would just start asking them questions, and I wouldn't attack them. I would say, all right, let's use, which one of our friends do we want to use as an example?
Oh, I always want to use Josh.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so Josh is in a leadership position. He's running his gym. He has these SOPs for how they're going to clean up the gym at the end of the night, and they're going to do all these things and have it ready for the next day.
His kickboxing gym.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Total Fitness Kickboxing in Denton.
Right.
Which you should go check out.
Go check it out.
Yeah. Also in the Colony.
Yeah.
Run by his brother, who's a stud. Awesome dude. So, all right. So Josh is like, so say his brother Tyler, who's running the gym, isn't setting things up the way he wants them to be set up. And he's all frustrated. I'm just going to start asking him questions. Be like, well, first I'm going to acknowledge that I'm listening to him, that he's heard. I'm going to say, all right, Josh, I understand that you're frustrated that Tyler isn't adhering to the SOPs that you have in place. Is that correct? And he's going to be like, yeah, we have these SOPs put in place. Like the bags need to be all positioned a certain way so that they can see the logos. They need to be, the discipline goes in the fridges need to be all, like the labels need to be facing out so you can see them. It looks good. It looks clean. It looks organized. And he's not doing it. And I'm going to ask him a question. Okay, so is he not cleaning the gym? Well, no, he's cleaning the gym. He's not lining up the bags in a perfect, format so that and the same with the drinks, the logos aren't like all placed in the right way. And so I'm going to ask him another question. Okay, so have you gotten like a bad review from a customer like that?
Somebody Yelp it.
Did somebody give you a bad review and this is a bad reflection of the business? Like, were the drinks warm in the fridge? Were they not put there in time? Well, no, they were put there in time. So my goal is by asking him enough questions, he can realize that Tyler's doing a lot of really good things. So that's what I want him to understand. And so I'm going to repeat that. Okay, so Tyler is cleaning the gym to your standards. Yes. So the gym's clean. It smells good. He's taking out the trash. The drinks are cold. He has a really good attitude. The music he plays is upbeat. Like, I'm going to find all like the
really good stuff.
Yes,
he's
like
doing,
all these things. Like win. Like, that's how you influence your leadership, is you get a bunch of wins. Well, sometimes your leadership not see that. And so I can come from the outside and influence and flank Josh to be able to understand, like, hey, like, okay. And so I would just show him those things, and then I would ask him, are those things really, really important to the success of the gym, or are they just really important to you? Do you just like it lined up a certain way?
Yeah.
And then he's going to have to answer that one or the other. And so if he says, well, no, it's not, because I know that doesn't determine the success of the gym. So I can ask that question. I'll be like, hey, does it determine? And if I have a good enough relationship with Josh as a business coach / consultant, I can also ask him, like, hey, Josh, is it really that important that you ruin your relationship with Tyler over the bags not being hung a certain way, or the discipline goes not being lined up? Or, what's the biggest thing?
Yeah.
Like, what's the issue? Is there actually an issue here, or is it a personal thing that bothers you? And then I can coach him and say, hey, sometimes, a leader has to give up the right to be right. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be effective? And I think the most effective way to lead Tyler and your gyms is to build a relationship, is to keep empowering Tyler to run a successful gym. And when you're there, if you want to organize the bags in a certain way, awesome. But, I don't think it's something that's worth losing leadership capital with Tyler.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to bring it to his awareness. And then guess what kind of conversation I have with Tyler? Hey, Tyler. Because maybe he's complaining about Josh. And he's like, oh, Josh, all these things. I'm like, no, I get it, man. That's frustrating. How much extra effort would it take for you to line up the bags and have them clean and organized, a certain way? And hey, when you're putting the discipline goes in the fridge, does it take up too much time for you to make sure all the labels are faced a certain way? Like, does that inhibit you from loading them in a timely manner? And he's going to say, well, no, not really. I'm like, all right, cool. So do you think if it took you an extra minute loading the fridge and an extra 2 minutes at the end of the night, I mean, we're talking less than 5 minutes total to have everything clean and organized, if that's something that Josh really liked and was important to him, do you think it would be worth the extra 5 minutes to make a deposit in the relationship with your boss and to make him happy? Or, like, I mean, it's 5 extra minutes. I mean, it doesn't hinder you from doing your job, and it's something that he likes, and at the end of the day, it's his business. Like, it's a great way to show him respect. Would you agree with that? And Tyler's gonna be like, yeah, actually, because I mean, these are logical questions. I'm not asking something irrational of somebody.
Right.
And so I'm going to guide both of them towards finding commonalities. Because at the end of the day, we have to really analyze how much effort we put into things that don't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
We only have so much time and energy, and we need to guard them both.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that's, that comes down to, if it's a church stuff, like, is it a kingdom issue? If it's within the organization, like, is it strategic? Like those types of things. Because we do get hung up on the little stuff, but most of those things have to do with preference over effectiveness.
Yeah.
And when we allow that preference to be the dominating factor in our decision making, what we're doing is we're eliminating a key component of our effectiveness as it relates to what other people see, and making the adjustments that are necessary to serve different customer bases, or a different customer that comes in that doesn't have the same preferences and things as you do. Yeah, it's wild, man. Yep. I wrote a little rap about your stuff. You ready for this?
No.
You sure? I've been watching old John Cena clips, and so I got something for you. Yeah, if you have OCDs on your SOPs, your ROI will DIE. What do you think about that? Yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome. You know what? You can, I'll give that to you. I'll give that to you. You can use that wherever you want now. Like the next,
The next muster.
yeah, you can use it at the next muster. Use it when we're in Dallas.
It is getting late.
It is, yeah.
All right. Anything else? What?
No, there's truth in that, though.
I know there actually is.
Yeah, there is.
That's actually
It's
what's
factual.
so frustrating right now is there's a lot of facts behind that.
So the last thing is, and I think you kind of hit on it a little bit, is when you are talking with somebody who is on the front line and they're frustrated with the SOPs because they see what they're doing is effective and that the SOPs are not necessary in order for the company to reach their strategic goal, right? To me, this looks a lot like some of the rigid structural things that happen within the military. Mm-hmm. Like why does was the old Pauly Shore movie In the Army Now? Did you ever watch that one?
Oh yes.
Yeah. There's when his gig line's not straight, right? And he's like trying to flirt with the drill sergeant or whatever. But like those things are put in place because we need to see that attention to detail matters, right? The 75 hard, the progress picture, which I hate. It's the worst part of that program. It's the one Andy's like, oh, you punched me in the face because of 5-minute cold shower. Bro, I can do a 5-minute cold shower all the time. Yep. That doesn't worry me at all. The progress picture, that's what makes me want to punch Andy Frisella in his face. So but those things, it's about paying attention to the details. How do you take somebody like Tyler in our scenario, right? We know Tyler's not really like that, but Tyler in our scenario.
And neither is Josh. I mean, Josh likes things clean and organized, but he does it because it's a reflection of his business, his home, what he does for us at Echelon Front.
100%.
To me, it's a respect thing.
Yeah.
And if things are out of place, he's like, all right, and then if it really bothers him, he'll just adjust it. If not, he's like, all right, cool, whatever. I do the same thing.
Yeah. So knowing that these are exaggerated scenarios that we're using with Josh and Tyler, when you have somebody like Tyler, because the complaint about SOPs from the frontline guys is going to be, he says I need to do this. We're getting all of these wins. Why do I need to take care of this stupid crap?
Yeah.
So
again,
how do you coach that?
Well, it's an alignment thing,
right?
And so if it's Tyler thinking these things towards Josh, I'm going to coach Tyler to ask earnest questions of his leadership, and I'm also going to Dave Burke said this when we first started working together at Echelon Front, and I've used it so many times. Dave Burke, because somebody had actually a similar question to this at a workshop that we're doing. It was April of 2017. Actually, the very first time we worked together. And somebody was asking this, and it was a younger person in the crowd, and they're like, my boss has these something along the lines of boss has SOPs and they don't really matter. We're blah, blah, blah. We're doing all these other things. And Dave was opening this door of this to the thought process of, does it really matter? Does it really matter? And then I remember he went on to say, he said, he's like, we had a saying in the Marine Corps. He goes, what interests my boss fascinates me. Very simple. What interests my boss fascinates me. If something is of interest to your boss, you should take interest to it as well. Yeah. Why? Why does it? Why? Ask her. Just at least start from there. Like, hey, why does Lucas really like the highlighters to be lined up a certain way? Why? And I might ask you, like, hey, Lucas, I noticed, like, whenever we get together for Bible studies, you have all your highlighters out, but they're lined up in a certain order.
Attacked.
Do you? I might be talking to myself. Yeah. Right? Hey, so Lucas, I noticed that when we sit down and we do Bible studies, you have a handful of highlighters, but they're all lined up a certain way. Like, is there a reason why you do that? And you might just be like, no, I just like things. I don't know. I like them color coded. I like them organized, or you could be like, I just, the way that they're organized, I just like that. And I'm like, all right, cool, sounds good. What I'm doing is I'm collecting a little intel. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to build a relationship with you, which requires collecting intel. What do you like? And I'm like, oh, cool. Lucas likes his highlighters organized. I'm just going to literally file it away in the back. And so if there comes a time where I see his highlighters like all messed up on a table and I know we're getting ready to meet up or whatever, I'm going to organize them really quick. And then that way, when you sit down, you might be like, did you organize those highlighters? I'm like, yeah, I know you like them organized. So yeah, I got here a little early and just organized the highlighters. And you're like, cool, man. Thanks. I'm like, cool. No worries. So, hey, man, how was your week? It's just like these little things. What I'm doing is I'm trying to build a genuine relationship with people.
Right.
In order for me to do that, I need to know what you like and what you don't like. And this isn't a manipulation thing. This is an influence thing. I want to be able to build a relationship with you so that we can get some wins, man. Let's stack up some wins together. And, it's just being a good human.
Yeah.
So, that's what I would do. I would coach Tyler to build a relationship with Josh and find out why Josh likes things done a certain way. And if it doesn't seem unreasonable, hey man, do them. Do those things for your leadership. Build up leadership capital so that when it comes time to where there's like a really big issue that you think is a big issue that's going to have a negative impact on the team, you can say, hey Josh, man, I don't think we should be doing this. Mm-hmm. Hey, you want to spend this much money a month on marketing? Like, I don't understand the return on the investment. Can we see the return on that investment? Because that seems like a big spend. I'm just worried about it hurting our bottom line. And Josh, if Tyler this whole time has been pushing back on every single thing that Josh has asked him to do, if he's cutting corners, if he's not like doing things at a high level, if he's always questioning things, then when Tyler brings this up as a legitimate concern, do you think there's a probability that Josh dismisses his concerns?
Oh, it's the boy who cried wolf.
There we go.
Yeah.
And so the best thing Tyler can do is be building up wins and building up that relationship capital so that when he does have something important to say, guess what Josh is going to do?
Listen.
He's going to listen to him.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yep.
Cool.
Discipline, not rigid.
Yes. Chapter 7 in Dichotomy of Leadership.
The book that mentions JP by name.
You can just skip that portion, which I did. I mentioned it and then went on to more.
Yeah.
And I knew that irritated you.
No, that's good. I like it.
All right. Close it out with some final thoughts. Again, I just want to thank all of you guys for the support you guys give us by just listening, subscribing, sharing, commenting on YouTube. Make sure you guys are also subscribed to the YouTube channel so you can get notified when the YouTube exclusive episodes come out. Following us on social media, I'm at JP Dinnell. Lucas is at Lucas Pinkard. That's Lucaspinckard. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn. Make sure you're also following Echelon Front. Go to echelonfront.com to learn more about what we are doing as an organization, how we can work with you and your company. Also, the future events that we have going on. Lucas mentioned the muster. That's going to be in October. We're going to have another one of the musters here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It's a 2-day leadership event.
A few tickets for that still available for the whole muster.
Dude, I was looking at the stats from the ops team of what our events are. That is going to sell out very quick. Yep. Also, the women's assembly in September.
Yeah, in San Antonio. Yeah,
it's going to be good.
We got a message from a women's assembly attendee. She's got her tickets and stuff. And she's going to come up and say, "Hey, come check out the church in the studio."
Oh, really?
Yeah,
dude, that's awesome. That's great. If you want to, you can also check out a ministry that I'm a part of called Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu on social media. We're at Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu _USA. Part of that with Isaac, Stephen, and Josh. We have a podcast episodes come out every Tuesday. We're also doing live events. We just had a live event this last Saturday. Almost 200 people were there.
Good grief.
Pedro Rocha gave the seminar. My pastor, Pastor Tyron, gave his testimony.
Is he any good?
It was so good.
That's
you could tell. Like I was talking to you about it. It's just like he's a pro.
Yep.
And I said, hey, 15 to 20 minutes, but I wanted more from him.
Right.
And I said, hey man, if you could do right at 20 minutes, that would be ideal. If you go long, that's fine. We can adjust. And he goes, no man, I'm good. And it was cool leading up to it. He's just asking me all these questions, and it was just, man, it was good. And his testimony was literally at the 20-minute mark.
Boom.
He was done.
Yep. Hit
and
the post.
then I was like, hey, do you mind closing out in prayer and do a prayer for salvation? He goes, yep, cool. Does that. And we had a handful of people that had
That's
salvation
awesome, man.
experiences. My buddy Mickey finally dedicated, made that commitment. He's been coming to Milestone on Saturdays, connecting with my buddy Brian Culver there. They're both Air Force vets, so I knew
That's
they would
cool.
have that connection on
Long-haired
Saturday
guys
nights.
then, huh?
Yeah. And it was just really cool. Him just making that commitment, what I mean?
For sure, man.
And he said the first time we went to Milestone, he wanted to make that commitment, but he's like, I didn't know if it was just like what I should do or what I want to do. He goes, but I knew I should, and he goes, but I just wanted it to be real, And, in which he's a very, very intelligent guy,
For sure.
So he's going to be. I think he was probably overthinking it. Which I know a lot of people do, because you're at church, you're at a good church, you're feeling the message, you're like, is this real?
You're feeling it.
Yeah, you're feeling it. Well, that's the Holy Spirit knocking.
man.
It's like, hey, I'm here. And I know you feel, every time you preach, that's what you're feeling.
Yeah.
That's what the environment that you've created here at this church is the same thing. And it was cool. He came up afterwards and he shared that with Isaac and I, and like Isaac started crying. I started crying. Our buddy Nate was there, and he told him, we told Tyron and Brian, and Brian's at the event too, and he was like, bro, like now like they're hugging it out, and dude,
That's
it
awesome, man.
was so incredible. So it's just like, it's just a good reminder of just the impact that ministry is having.
Yeah.
And I'm a small part of it, and I'm just stoked to be a part of it. And if you want to check out the podcast, you guys should check out the free events that we have coming up. Go to our Instagram site. We have all that stuff, and also our website to order rash guards, t-shirts,
hats,
and now
stickers. What?
coffee.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yes.
the Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu coffee beans.
Dude, it's awesome. Also, Texas beef company I'm a part of called Little Cow to Co.
Get that beef.
Yeah, man. Best friend Steven started that company in 2017. Last year, my wife and I partnered with him and his wife. The company's website is littlecattle.co, so littlecattle.co. We can deliver beef anywhere in the lower 48 states. We are a custom order beef company, which allows you to order exactly what you want each time based off the needs of your family. We also have a ground beef subscription plan as well that is pretty popular. You're on that. It's good.
I am. It's delicious.
It is. And
We've been making smash burgers.
When you guys are listening to this episode, we are actually going to be restocking our freezers. We had 3 more steers that are processed, picking them up from our new processor, which everyone's going to get to experience the new packaging.
Oh, nice.
Oh, it's awesome.
That's cool.
It is awesome. And I think they're going to be available. If not, they will be in the very near future, but I think we're doing them on this order. Beef sticks.
Ooh, really?
They're unreal.
No way.
Bro.
I'm excited about this.
These beef sticks are...
I might get on the 20 pounds of beef sticks a month.
Dude, they are tasty.
That's so good,
That'd
dude.
be a lot of beef
Yeah,
sticks.
that's
I was
so
just
much
thinking of
beef
like how many
sticks.
ounces each beef stick is. I'm like, good Lord, that's a
That's
lot.
so many beef sticks.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, the new beef tallow products we launched, the
Yeah.
body butter, the tallow cream, the lip balm. We're also working on a sunscreen and an
really?
after sun product. Dude, they're awesome.
That's so cool.
Dude, I got baked, sunburnt on the 4th of July. I did. And I was just like doing lawn work. I was like bright red, man.
Oof.
Put that stuff on multiple times, like I'm sorry, not multiple times, but 1 to 2 times a day for multiple days. Dude, it was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we used to use before aloe vera became like a big marketed thing.
Yeah.
So
it's a good natural product that you should be taking.
100%.
Also, if you want to send your customers, clients, family members custom orders of beef to show them appreciation, we can do that. You can send us an email and let us know that you're doing that, and we'll add custom notes, letters, whatever you want to those orders. Send that out. Also, another company I'm part of with Josh Strasburger called On the Path Printing on Instagram. We are at on the Path Printing. We're a custom apparel printing company, so any of those needs, send us a message, let us know. Also check out Bruiser Arms. We are an Instagram company Leif, Jocko, and I are a part of. We'll put out some training content soon, as well as gear. We have custom gear packages that you guys can actually purchase, so if you're interested in that, shoot me a message. I can connect you with Leif and or some of the other guys that we've been building out the custom gear at.
That's so cool,
dude. Those gun boxes are unreal.
So
I know
legit.
you've seen pictures of them. They're incredible. Also, lastly, just want to thank Origin and Jocko Fuel, all the support that they have given me over the years, and the support that they give this podcast and our guests and Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu. They do a lot for the Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu ministry, which has been awesome. And, just what they're doing, they're an American-made company, meaning 100% of their things are made in America.
Yep.
It started off doing gis and then rash guards, and then it's now jeans and boots and belts and wallets and hats and hoodies, T-shirts. I mean, everything. Hunt line, 100% American hunt line is crazy.
That's so cool.
I know you're a fan of the Nylock pants. Those field pants are unreal. And the Versalite pants.
Yeah, the Versalites are the ones that I've been rocking.
You've been rocking those. You like those, huh?
So good. Yeah, I used to the Eddie Bauer adventure pants used to be like my go-to.
Oh yeah.
Whenever I was like speaking and stuff, I prefer the Versalite over the Eddie Bauer.
Way better. Way better than Lululemon's pants. Have you ever? Yeah. So I had a pair of the Lululemon pants for like travel and speaking. They're super nice, comfortable. Yep. They don't even come close to the Versalites.
No, I was really impressed. Kirsten, also big fan of the Versalites.
She's like, look at that booty.
Yeah, Daddy's got some cake.
Hannah says the same thing. She's like, ooh, I like those pants. Yep. Like, yeah, girl, get it.
Yeah, and the Jocko Fuel stuff, 7-Elevens in Texas, right? Molk is now at 7-Eleven in Texas, and it's buy one, get one for $1 all the way through August.
Molk RTD is ready to drink.
Yep.
Those are awesome.
Yeah, so those are great. And then there's a lot of places that are doing some deals on the Hydrate RTDs for the next little bit. Yeah.
I know Vitamin Shop's been doing some deals on the Goes and the Hydrates.
Yeah, man.
My buddy Jeremiah went to one of the locations and literally bought every single one of the Goes that they had. It was just like, I'm going to get all the cases. And the guy was like, okay.
Yeah.
And just
some of them they're like, oh, it's a limit 6, and other people are like, no, if you're gonna take them.
Well, he's like, cool, I'm gonna come back with each of my kids, and we're all
exactly.
And the guy was like,
I'm just gonna give them all cash.
The guy's like, all right, you know what? It's cool.
I'll tell you, that's how we stocked the fridge that's in the other room. I took the interns. They're like, where are we going? I was like, we're going to Vitamin Shop. And they're like, for what? I was like, there's 3 in our area. I'm giving you each 20. I felt like my mom at Toys R Us. I'm giving you $20. This is all you can get. And so like that's what we did, right? We hit them up. We got the Hydrates, which we're out of now because the guys love them. They're so good.
Unreal.
Yeah, Kirsten is drinking like 1 fruit punch Hydrate RTD a day. She is really upset that they don't have the mix for that. They only get the lemon lime and the blue ras mix.
Oh,
yeah, she's like, if she goes, you need to call JP and tell JP to call Mr. Jocko's and get him on it. So you got to call Mr. Jocko's and you got to call Mr. Slicks. So, and then the Goes, man. But whenever they got them up there, so we loaded up the fridge on everything. It's awesome. And the mango passion fruit, don't sleep on it. That's just so good. That might be my new favorite flavor.
Really?
Yeah. Yep. Don't get me wrong, I love the sour apple.
Oh yeah, it's great.
But I do prefer the mango passion fruit to the orange.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll just
it's moved up into that spot where it's like 1B. Is that one?
1B.
Yeah.
All right. So if you want to check out what we have been talking about, you can also go to originusa.com or jockofuel.com to get your supplements, clean energy drinks, clean supplements. Hey, as we close it out, I just want to say thank you, obviously, for you guys listening and supporting. But I also want to remind you what we talked about, the power of training, the power of watching your people, the power of building a relationship, the power of being intentional. The power of being intentional in what you're doing and understanding there needs to be balance. So I hope this has been an episode to remind you to go out there, do the work, and to never settle. This has been the JP Dinnell Podcast, episode 44.